Welcome to UNCAGED, the show that celebrates thought leadership from today's top business leaders. The program provides a voice to amazing executives from around the globe who are shaping the world of business today and mapping the path to the commerce of tomorrow. Today, we're speaking with Nic McMahon. Hey, Nic, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Nic is the Chief Executive Officer at United Language Group. He has been the Chief Operating Officer there. He's really worked his way through the organization, and we're going to talk a lot about United Language Group, which is, one of the world's largest and most innovative translation, localization, and interpreting providers. They have offices in 7 countries on 3 continents. And so we'll talk about their solutions in a bit. But before we get there, Nic, tell us a little bit about yourself and your career.
I've been very lucky, like is everything. I think a lot of hard work and a lot of luck. But I did get very lucky. I managed to come to America for 2 years, just for a project. I was project manager. We had a client starting up, and it was actually the Bay Area when the Bay Area was Silicon Valley. And I was like, hey, we should go out there. Like, it's crazy out there. And luckily enough, because it was like that time of life, there was a lot of capital around. And so as a company, we were able to make the investment. I came out as a project manager to set up an office in the US, and it was for 2 years. Don't tell anyone, but I didn't even have a proper visa at that time. But we came in, and that was 20 years ago, and so it's really been a crazy ride for me. From an opportunity perspective by coming to America, able to grow and expand. About 4 years ago, we became part of the United Language Group through a PE-driven roll-up. And we really spent the last 4 years, uniting that entity and getting, the culture aligned and the cultural interwoven, so we could really become, one combined entity, and not just the word united, but actually operate in a united fashion. And it's been awesome. It's an amazing group of people. I feel very privileged to be able to, act in a CEO capacity on their behalf. But it's been an amazing ride. A lot of opportunity, a lot of luck, and I would like to say probably, quite a lot of hard work too.
So, that's a great story. And you know what? The visa stuff, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah,
you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah. I used to have to go backwards and forwards like all the time to, before we could solidify it. But it's funny now because we're such a bigger company. We would never dream of just like sending someone over to a different country. Like, good luck over there. Here's a suitcase.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you.
But that's what we needed to do back then.
So tell me a little bit more about United Language Group and, the solutions that you guys provide and really what your focus is on right now.
Yeah. And I think, from outside the industry, a lot of people will always think about language as, it's the sort of spoken word, the translation. But what we look at is language, culture, results. And the concept is that language is a very useful proxy to connect to a culture. And so when you're really trying to drive a product or a service forward, or, we've spoken in the past around healthcare and trying to sort of work out why, how do I get the best out of healthcare? It's a very good example of how language, culture come together to produce a result. So when you first, in a healthcare setting, you might have something like, please take this pill or fill out this form. And what is heard by non-English speaking communities is please take this poison and fill out this deportation form, because they're not used to that environment. And that's not a language issue, but everyone's like, oh, we'll translate into Vietnamese, it'll be fine. It's not a language issue. Language is part of it, but language is a proxy for culture. And you must address culture and language to get a proper result. And what everybody cares about is, does that Vietnamese patient become better? Do they not readmit themselves into the ER in a month's time, with more complicated conditions? And so United Language Group is really focused on, not just in healthcare, but in many regulated markets. We help companies like Emerson and Oracle go global too. But it's not just the translation component. It's how do we connect to the culture, and how do we bring culture and language together to really create a result that is meaningful for that company?
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. Certainly one of the things that, as we've expanded globally, and even when we have people operating in English, is to be able to capture that local culture, cultural roots, the cultural appreciation, cultural understanding.
Yeah.
It's truly an important factor.
It actually is an interesting thing from your past, not to share too much probably public information, but it's interesting that you were sort of in an English town called Oxford, where they speak English. And then you went to an American town, Miami, where they also speak, maybe a little less so, but they speak English.
Yes.
Like this, it's a very mixed culture within Miami, but they, predominantly speak English. It's US city. And so therefore, because they speak English, they must be the same city. And anyone that's been to both Oxford and Miami, they know that like that language, there's a lot more than language going on within that environment. And I think when you don't speak Vietnamese, you might be like, oh, it's Vietnamese, but it's the same difference.
Yeah, the gentleman that drives our APAC group has highlighted to us, he'll sometimes say, we really need to speak better Australian. You're kind of like, okay, that's English, but it's obviously the cultural appreciation and the tonalities and all of those elements. So what a fascinating area to be working in, especially right now. I mean, there's so much happening in the language space, certainly from a technology perspective, from a geopolitical perspective, from almost every area. When you look out into the business landscape today, what are the kind of key driving forces for you guys?
Yeah, it's a really mixed bag for us. Like, so it's been very interesting. Everybody, right, for the whole couple of last years has been, may you live in interesting times. It's been like that for the last couple of years. We've seen some sectors and some markets accelerate, dramatically. Because let's go back to the LEP healthcare sort of market, and the desire to provide a greater equity of outcome for non-English speaking patients. COVID really identified a weakness, like a real human level weakness and a massive impact, where a whole section of the American society was not getting the same level of outcome and health benefit that English speaking members were. And so we've seen a significant acceleration in government, in many regulated bodies, in a desire to bridge this gap and create a more equitable outcome for services and availability of support from those agencies, from the healthcare bodies, from life science companies. And so those areas have really been driven, it's been a huge shift, significant growth, significant opportunity in those markets. Conversely, we see companies, in the manufacturing space, in the direct consumer space, where they are starting to think like, what do we do about global expansion? Do we want to go into another global country right now? Is this the time to be expanding globally? And so we've seen a lot of those sort of consumer-focused verticals start to pull back a little bit, either through supply chain disruption or through just a little bit of caution on the global economy and global outlook. So we're always like this. It's like, half good, half bad, and you're sort of balancing your way through it. I think on an international basis, another thing that we've ultimately learned is you can't close the door to international markets. And so at this point, companies are so heavily integrated on an international scale. So when the Ukraine, grain stops, it has a global impact. When the Chinese, Shanghai market shuts down, it has a global impact. And so really more than ever, the need to understand, certainly communicate, but connect to culture to really drive an outcome becomes vastly more important. And I think in the old days, you might have a customer go, okay, we'll just translate a bunch of stuff. And a bit, not to be mean, but a bit like your Australian comment there. In the old days, you could just translate a bunch of stuff, because the Australian nation would come together and be like, what, I'm gonna go with it, and I'll learn it, and I'll bridge the gap in culture. Now, the desire to truly connect, if you really want to grow a market, that we're integrated, there's heavy competition, and now you must differentiate in that market. And if you want to differentiate in that market, you must connect to culture.
You've seen that with certain marketing and branding over the years as well. Some companies that, like McDonald's, I remember when they really pushed into Europe and Asia, and they really made an effort to build that local connection. And certainly I would imagine probably some very, very young people might be surprised to even know that that's an international company, much less an American one.
Yeah.
So
Heinz, for me, Heinz, growing up, Heinz makes Britain great. And growing up, like, that was a huge thing. Like, it wasn't until I was in my early 20s I found out it was an American company, and I was like, I was like, what? That's a cornerstone of the UK history.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's
Yeah,
Heinz baked beans and Heinz salad cream, right?
that's
Yeah,
right.
those are
Yeah,
very
really. Yeah.
British things.
There was
Uh,
only one salad dressing growing up. It was like there was a salad cream. It was the only type of dressing available.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've lived through this kind of crazy moment, Nick. I was just curious, you obviously are handling language services. I imagine you guys perhaps are quite virtual in some ways in how you work already. But tell me a little bit of how the pandemic altered the way you guys work and perhaps some opportunities that came from it.
Yeah, and in the written language part of our business, when let's say, you think about websites or documentation of some sort, right? In the written part of our business, that was highly virtualized anyway. So,
Mhm.
we did have core offices and people certainly went into core offices, but the reality was you could get a call at 6 a.m., you can get a call at 10 p.m. Like it's highly globalized, it's highly virtualized. And so people would go into an office, but that was more habit forming, I think, than any real requirement. And our systems always supported distributed workforce. So when we said to people, hey, on the written side of things, you're going home, it was more like, yeah, like, okay. I think the concept that was going to be forever, that was a bit of a human challenge. But it was an easier achieved transition. On the spoken side of language, right, interpretation, right? So when somebody calls and brings an interpreter onto a call, that was all in call centers. It was all physical. It was all hardwired. You need 99.9999% uptime. You need highly resilient frameworks and networks to make sure that those calls always go through. You think if you're on a healthcare call or a 911 call, you can't drop those calls. And as the rest of the world saw, like overnight, like everybody had to virtualize. So I think ultimately it took us about 3 weeks, but that was 3 weeks of, the people, our team, working basically 24 hours a day to try to like make that happen. And it was really stressful. So about 50% of our business basically went from a history of completely physically in this highly infrastructured call center environment to virtualized. And it was a huge shift for us. It was huge.
Yeah, no, I can imagine, because you do have such a high level of control when you do have those call centers. And then even if you try to replicate that from one of these home-based call structures, it's very different. It's an interesting challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, I mean, it's great to see, obviously, that the things seem to be building in with some of the verticals that you guys are working in. As you look forward into 2022, what are the main priorities?
For us, I mean, innovation does always drive, you spoke to it. Innovation for us always drives, obviously like the future, I guess it's self-evident. But effectively, what we're looking at is neuro machine translation and natural language processing. And increasingly, we're starting to use that AI-driven technology to improve the way that we can communicate. And it's, we'd have to do a separate hour on it. But AI is fundamentally changing what the humans within our industry do. And the good news is you still need humans. We're not in a position where you're going to get rid of all human translation. But we've had machine translation, computers doing translation since 1953, right? So like you'd be like, oh, okay, like it's AI, this is the net new thing. And I think a lot of us, when we're like, oh, AI, okay, it's the next new machine translation. 4 years ago, machine translation adoption was less than 2%. Right now, it's within the last 2 years, that's gone to over 60% of our work is driven by AI. Yep. But what we've done is migrating people into a higher value activity where they're reviewing that content and actually checking for voice, tone, and style and this cultural connectivity. Like, okay, you've now got French, but is this the French that's really going to emotionally connect, right? Okay, you've now got French, but is this really the material that's going to drive a better healthcare outcome? So we're looking at that. I think innovation, around AI and natural language processing is really driving a lot of opportunity for us, and is opening up doors to do and communicate in ways that previously, weren't possible. I think that's going to be good. And then also outcomes, and sort of realizing that to truly address an outcome, you need a much more holistic response. And so, we're getting into a lot of new areas that drive this holistic view of an outcome and culture. So, when we think about a solution now, it might not just be written translation. It might be a mixture of written, spoken, advertising campaigns, in-person meetings and community development, literally in fields, representing organizations, making personal human connections. And I think those two things together are really, driving a very interesting future for us. And
the AI stuff fascinates me. I mean, there was a moment in my life where I managed a company that owned very large call centers, and they were trying to divest the call center business. And you'd think that the natural purchasers might be other call centers, but the big groups that were interested in buying them were all AI related companies. They just wanted the data. They wanted the data. So
is for us too. Like, I mean, you suddenly realize, there's a lot of value in data. If you create really, artificial intelligence generates very clever students, but somebody's got to train that student to do something. So if we think that Google and Microsoft, they're going to win AI because they create clever students. But then what happens for a company like ours, or many of the people listening perhaps, is like your opportunity is training that clever student, that artificial intelligence, to do something. So it's like, they create the students, they're the parents, but we're Harvard, right? Or we're the educational facility that will train it to do something. And in doing so, they license the value of what it does to us. So we get the benefit of it.
Nic, it's been amazing to talk with you. If someone wanted to learn more about what you and the United Language Group are doing, what's the best place to get in touch with you?
ULGgroup.com, the website is the best way to go. It's there are lots of links there. United Language Group, is the full name, right? UnitedLanguageGroup.com. It's the best way to contact us. There's live assistance there too, so you can get instant response. And then we do offer 24/7 global response within 30 minutes. So if you want to know anything about us, and we're not a high attack sales organization, and we're very much about providing expertise and connecting you to experts. So if you contact us, we can get somebody who really knows the subject you're looking for, and we'll make a connection and sort of provide advice and guidance.
Well, I'm happy to know, Nic, that we're building those language bridges, those cultural bridges that are really critical right now. For any of us that have lived and worked globally, we know that this is important on so many societal levels. So, Nic, thank you so much for being on the show. We've been speaking with Nic McMahon. He's the CEO of the United Language Group. The United Language Group is one of the largest, most innovative translation, localization, and interpreting providers. They have offices in over 7 countries and on 3 continents. We've been talking to Nic about really the progression in the field of translation, from just changing the language to really building that deep critical cultural understanding, especially when it comes to major topics like pandemic care, healthcare, making sure that people really understand, providing groups that perhaps don't have that equitable understanding because they perhaps live in an English market that they might be forgotten. And this will allow them to be really heard. Nic, thank you so much for being on UNCAGED today, and we look forward to having you back.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's been great.
Cheers.